Raising teenagers is hard. Understatement of the century. This is Mentor Select. Mentor Select. Parenting teens to be successful adults. Mentor Select serves parents who are raising teens. Every week, Derrich interviews leading experts that work with teens, educators, counselors, mentors, and authors to give you practical tips, strategies, and resources that you can incorporate immediately to better connect and understand your teen. All while parenting them to be successful adults, focusing on social and emotional development, something that's left out of the classroom, but not in ours. Be sure to subscribe, share, and rate. This is Mentor Select, and this is your host, Derrich Phillips.
Welcome to episode 76 of the Mentor Select podcast. I am thrilled that you are joining me today. Typically, I do interviews for my podcast, but today's going to be a little different. This episode, I'm actually going to answer the top 10 questions that I've received about podcasting over the past 2 years. So just to give you all some insight into the process of podcasting, my inspiration, all the different things that people, the listeners, are wondering and sending in questions, either asking me or asking me in person. I want to share those answers with you today. This episode is going to be short, but hopefully get some value from it and get a better understanding of just what podcast entails and also why I do what I do. So probably the number one question I receive most often when people find out that I'm a podcaster is, why did I start a podcast? People frequently ask me that. And for me, one of the biggest reasons is I was just a big fan of podcasts. I listened to podcasts every day on the way to work or in the gym, or any time I had opportunity to listen to podcasts. I enjoyed consuming that content. But eventually I got to the point where I decided I wanted to not just be a consumer, I also wanted to be a creator. I wanted to produce content as well, because I feel everyone has a story. Everyone has just some type of value that they can share with the world. And I wanted to make my contributions to the world. And at the time, I had recently got laid off from my job. I worked for Hewlett-Packard Enterprise for 3 years. And I got laid off and I had a lot of time on my hands at that point. And I wanted to focus initially on career development, because I know a lot of people are working in careers that they hate and just not passionate about the work that they do. So initially, Mentor Select was started as all about following your passions. So I was interviewing people who are just remarkable people who are doing things who are working in careers that they absolutely love, that they feel they're making a difference, really doing their part to change the world. So up to this point, the first 75 interviews were people that fell into that category. So that's made it a lot of fun, definitely. The second question I get most often is, what is my podcast about? And essentially, I just kind of answered that question for you, so I jumped ahead. But I just answered 1 and 2 together. So I was efficient with that answer. So number 3, what is the time commitment for podcasting? I think that's a really good question. And a lot of times I get that question from aspiring podcasters. People are looking to start their own show. Now, the time commitment can vary. For me, I would say, as far as scheduling an interview, doing an interview, then editing the interview and posting it, publishing the interview, on average, I would say 3 to 4 hours per week is the commitment I make to accomplish those steps, that workflow. Now, sometimes, some weeks it's more, some weeks it's less. So it really just varies, but I would say that's the average. When I first started, I probably spent more time just because I was fumbling my way through, figuring it out. It was a learning curve. So it took more time, but now on average, 3 to 4 hours total, and sometimes less. Number 4 on the list of questions, How do I find my guest? You'd be surprised. People love sharing their stories, so it's not hard to find incredible people to interview. For me, I'm always on the lookout for people who would make a good guest, people who have extraordinary stories, just doing remarkable things. And whenever I identify that person, either if it's in person, if I know them, or I would just either contact them via email, social media, or face to face. It just depends on the situation, but it's just a matter of action. Say, hey, I host a podcast, Mentor Select. This is what it's about, and I would love to interview you. Now, not everyone's going to say yes for whatever reasons. It could be time commitments or just time. It could be time conflicts or whatever. But I would say over 90% of people I ask to interview, they actually say yes. So it's not hard to find a guest. You just have to be on the lookout for who would make great guests. Number 5 on the list is, how do I know what to ask? What questions to ask my guests? And I try to keep my interviews conversational. So I just kind of go with the flow. I have the parameters of what we're going to talk about, but I just really want to hear their story. And while I'm listening to them, I'm also taking notes or highlighting something that I want to make sure I recap, or something that I dive deeper into. That's pretty much how I figure out the questions. Like I said, just have those parameters. We're not just talking about random things. We're really focused on the topic of the podcast within the context of their story. So it really makes it easier. And the more you interview, the better you get. And you know when to pivot and when to dig deeper and when to change the subject. So just a skill you have to develop, but it's not complicated. Number 6, what do I enjoy most about podcasting? What I enjoy most is just hearing people's stories. What I enjoy most about podcasting is being able to hear people inspirational stories and share it with my listeners. Because a lot of times there are ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but they are kind of like the unsung heroes, or they don't get spotlighted like celebrities or entertainers, things like that. So I enjoy spotlighting people's story and sharing it because they deserve it. They're doing remarkable things. So I enjoy sharing that. Number 7, what do I enjoy least about podcasting? I would say editing. I enjoy the interviews, but as far as editing, I don't actually enjoy editing. Even though I've gotten quite good at it over the last 2 years, just practice makes perfect. But I would say that's the thing I look forward to least, is having to edit a episode, because that can be really tedious and time consuming, just depending on how much editing you have to do, the sound quality, things like that. So that's why I enjoy least, but it's a necessary evil. But also, Number 8, what's the difference between podcasting and YouTube? That's the question I get frequently as well. And the biggest difference is, so podcasting is just audio and YouTube is video. That's the most obvious explanation. But also, there are people who essentially leverage their YouTube channel. They'll create videos and then also they'll release that video as a podcast, as audio only. So I think that's a good way to use one piece of content in multiple ways, disseminate it in multiple ways for your listeners. So it's just the biggest difference is video. So number 9 on the list, we're moving right along. What's next for the Mentor Select podcast? Well, as you heard in episode 75, I'm shifting the focus of the Mentor Select podcast from career development to serving those parents and educators and coaches and mentors who work with teenagers. And I really want to be a resource for them. I'm very passionate about mentoring teenagers and preparing them to transition into adulthood successfully. So my future interview, starting with episode 77, will be focused on interviewing those experts who work with teenagers day in, day out, so they can share those tips, strategies, and resources to help teens transition into adulthood successfully. Number 10, this is one people are either often curious about or even directly ask me, how much do I make from podcasting? Well, full disclosure, over the past 2 years, I haven't made any money from podcasting per se directly, because it wasn't really one of my goals to, when I first launched the podcast, I was just wanted to get my story out there. I wanted to have a platform, and it wasn't my goal to necessarily get to advertise or to get monetized. Now in year 2, I've identified opportunities to monetize our podcast. So I'm definitely going down that path now, and I expect to monetize it pretty soon. Also, if you're interested in now, having said that, I have received a lot of opportunities that has led to monetization. I think as a result, either directly or indirectly, from having a podcast. Certainly having a platform is leverage, and it gives you exposure to sell, whether it's your products, your speeches, books, whatever, through your podcast. So it's definitely a way to it's a lot of different ways to monetize podcasting. Well, we covered the top 10 questions that I get frequently. I just wanted to give you all a little more behind the curtains and let you know why I do what I do. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you have any questions, certainly reach out to me. I'm always available to ask questions and just provide you additional insight. And I really value you being a listener, supporting the Mentor Select podcast.
You've been listening to Mentor Select. Mentor Select. Parenting teens to be successful adults. Hosted by Derrich Phillips. Raising teenagers is hard. Understatement of the century. We get it. That's why Derrich interviews leading experts that work with teens, educators, counselors, mentors, and authors to give you practical tips, strategies, and resources that you can incorporate immediately to better connect and understand your teen. That's why we do the show. Be sure to share Mentor Select with other parents of teens. Follow us on social media at Mentor Select to stay up to date on the latest tips, strategies, and resources for parenting teens. Send your questions and comments to derrich@mentorselect.com. Tune in every Wednesday for new episodes. Till next time, this is Mentor Select.